All right. Let's do it.
Watch out! What are you so afraid of? Run! I can't get infected. Everyone I have cared for has died or left me. We stick together.
I got this. After all we've been through, everything that I've done, it can't be for nothing. I'm just a girl, not a threat.
What are you doing?
I have to finish it. You can't stop this. I'm gonna find and I'm gonna kill every last one of them.
So get this, Malik and I have been for a while planning to do like a discussion video about The Last of Us in preparation for the release of The Last of Us Part 2, which should be out. There are already several reviews out at the time of this recording. The two of us got around to doing that discussion video, and then unfortunately for both of us, the audio, due to technical difficulties, ended up being unusable. So instead of the two of us discussing this game for roundabouts like 45 minutes to an hour, you are going to get me sort of just talking about my experience with it in what I have now, at this moment, decided is a race between myself and Loverboy Media to determine who can get out The Last of Us video quicker. So The Last of Us is actually a game that I, of course, would need some persuading to play, just because it's not entirely in my wheelhouse. Like, survival horror isn't really a genre of media, and especially gaming, that I personally put much stock in. But I'm so glad that I did get around to playing this, because it really was an interesting experience. And the thing that I think puts me off of survival horror is that a lot of it feels kind of formulaic to me. And just from what I see, especially in gaming, it's not a genre that I think I would get a lot out of, just because there's not a lot of variance. But this game, I think, is very cognizant of that. And I get the sense, playing this game, that they were very aware of the need to vary things up to keep you invested so that things never feel too samey. And so, like, this is a game where, obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, spoilers for this game throughout this video, you play as Joel and Ellie, this pair, this old man and a little girl, who are sort of living in a world that's been in a, zombie, we're not saying the Z word, apocalypse. They've been living in this status quo of like these infected running around all over the place for about 20 years. And so both of them have their own sort of stories in their history, and Ellie, being the one person who is immune to infection, has to be shepherded by Joel basically across a city, across the country. I forget exactly what the span of locations for this game is, but the idea is you're trying to get her to this specific location where they'll be able to take her blood and develop a cure. And the situations that you get into over the course of this journey are all really interesting and all very varied, and the characters that you meet and the characters that you sort of collaborate with, who serve as allies and companions on your journey, are all sort of nice reflections of the different reactions that you'd expect to see out of a situation like this. Like, you've got Bill, who's sort of the crazy survivalist guy, and you've got Sam and Henry, who are a pair of brothers who kind of reflect Joel and Ellie in different ways, and their story ends, unfortunately, kind of tragically. And like, you've got a big crux of Joel and Ellie's relationship being the way that Ellie kind of has to be allowed to have her independence and has to be given the opportunity to be Joel's equal and be allowed to assist him with surviving and be allowed to be proactive. And you've got Henry and Sam. Henry, the older brother, who really doesn't allow Sam that same kind of autonomy and agency. and it unfortunately creates this situation where Sam gets infected and Henry has to take his life, and then Henry takes his own life. And all around these two characters are other characters like that whose role in the story is punctuated with this tragedy. And this is a very, very bleak game, and like that's most reflected in the ending, which we'll get to in due time. But before any of that, I just want to talk about how I think, better than a lot of games, like story-driven games I can think of, this game integrates the gameplay with the emotion of the storytelling in really, really brilliant ways. And I'm looking forward to seeing that expanded on in the sequel, where we do this neat thing throughout the game consistently, where stuff that could have easily been conveyed in just cutscenes, and which I think a lesser game would probably relegate to cutscenes and nothing else, will instead use gameplay as much as possible to put you in the headspace of the characters. And so the cutscenes are almost just like punctuation marks on the story that's being told through the game. We do a similar thing to stuff like Spider-Man PS4, where you'll find little tokens or little collectible items throughout the game that will give you sort of like background story and maybe story of characters that you never really get to meet, and more world building and setting and stuff. The world building is spectacular in this game. So that's one way that we get a lot of story told, is in sort of like notes and like drawings and like comic books that you'll find and stuff like that, like little things that you can read through to get a sense of like, okay, this is what other people outside of our sphere have been up to. But the way that we use the gameplay to inform the story outside of that, where it's like it's immediate, it's the first thing that this game does, is have you play as Joel's daughter, Sarah. And Sarah is the first character that you play as in this game. And so, if you're going into this game blind, then you play as this character, and it preys on like this immediate impulse that we have to assume a sort of immunity for playable characters. And so when we end this sequence, we start off playing as Sarah and then we kind of hand off to Joel. When we end that first 10-20 minute sequence of gameplay with Sarah dying, not even at the hands of the infected, but at the hands of sort of like the soldiers who were there to do, trying to control the situation, and we cut to 20 years later and Joel has just been living in misery, mourning the loss of his daughter, it's this, it hits you harder than if we'd only been introduced to that character through scripted, like basically movie. And this game is very, very cognizant of that. It's very cognizant of the power of what it chooses to show you and what it chooses to let you experience firsthand through the gameplay. And so that'll include other elements of the gameplay, like how at a certain point, once you're playing as Ellie, and this is much later in the game, you have a section where you have to sort of like team up with this guy David. And at this point, the game has set a precedent for the characters that you team up with. You'll have maybe a little bit of friction with them, but for the most part, they are like good guys, and they are allies, and they're sort of people that you consider friends. That set the precedent of, oh, we're teaming up with this David guy, I guess he's not such a bad guy. And then the story takes a turn, and that guy ends up being probably the worst human being in the whole game. And where we go with him and his sort of crew is like a very dark place. And like this just occurs to me, like with the collectible sort of notes and stuff that I mentioned earlier. There's a DLC for the game where you primarily play as Ellie, and it's intercutting, like her taking care of Joel after he suffered an injury around the midpoint of the game, and her own personal backstory, like prior to meeting Joel, finding out that she's immune to the infection and all that stuff. The sort of, I guess, present day sequences of that DLC are punctuated by her finding these notes of like the military officers who crashed this helicopter that she's trying to get to. And the story that's told through those notes of like these three guys that crashed and how they slowly kind of get picked off by the infected, it's so dark and so compelling, and it's purely secondhand. And that kind of thing is all over this game. The way that characters' body language and the way that they interact with each other in gameplay sequences is very deliberate. The beginning of that sort of arc between Ellie and Joel, where he gives her more independence, that starts with this section early in the game where Joel finds himself in some danger and Ellie takes this guy off of him and kills him, and it's her first time, as far as we're aware, killing a person, and Joel doesn't exactly react to that in the best way, and it creates this tension between them that is reflected in the way that Ellie's body language changes as, like, she follows you around for the rest of that stretch of the gameplay. Like, she has a bit more of a sullen demeanor about her, and she's sort of like leaning on walls and sort of like looking at her feet and stuff. And it's that kind of level of thought that's put into sort of stuff that other games would get away with not even thinking about, and that you wouldn't even necessarily expect. But it shows the dedication to story and how so much of this game is all about story. It's a very story-focused experience. And it doesn't hurt that Ellie is voiced by Ashley Johnson, who is a great actor and voice actor, who I primarily, prior to this game, knew her as Tara from Teen Titans and Tulip from Infinity Train. So like, I couldn't help but think of Tulip a lot of times when she was saying her lines, but at the same time that really highlights, I think, her strength as an actress, because she has a very distinctive voice. Like, I tell you that she's been those characters, and like, she doesn't like modulate her voice or provide herself with like an affect or anything, but at the same time, you listen to any character that she plays, like those three characters that I just listed, you listen to them, and she is very clearly playing different people. And like, all three of those characters are young girls, like 13 to 14-year-olds. Even if I tell you, like, she is playing these sort of same age range of characters, there's a very distinct edge that she gives to each of them. And so, Ellie both sounds like Tulip and doesn't sound like Tulip, and she sounds like Tara and she doesn't sound like Tara. And that, I think, is the sign of a great actress with a lot of range, even more so than, oh, she can make herself sound completely different. Troy Baker also gives a great performance as Joel, and there's a lot of great vocal and physical performances throughout this game, but I think Ashley Johnson as Ellie really steals the show, and as far as the acting goes, it's her above everyone else, I feel like. There are characters in this game who you don't even see, who I think leave kind of an impression. And I mean, like, besides just the note thing, like characters who you only hear through voiceover. So like, the main one I'm thinking of is, like, there's this section of gameplay, it's in the Henry and Sam section, where there's this sniper who starts messing with you, and he's just such a jackass for no reason. And it's like, you never see this guy, but like, he's got such a clear character, like, he's so antagonistic, and you're only interacting with him indirectly for like what could be 5 to 10 minutes of gameplay, really. And just the way that this world is so full of character like that, and it's so alive, ironically, is so great. I don't even have all that much to say about the infected themselves, like the zombies in the game, aside from the fact that, like, they're freaking terrifying. And a large part of that is the sound design. Like, you've got the clickers and the bloaters who are more visually scary in the sense that, like, the infection is a mutation of cordyceps, so they've got, like, fungus that's, like, blooming out of their face, so it's like they've split their skull open with the fungus. Like, they've got fungi, like, stretching out of their heads and stretching out of their bodies, and that's, like, visually horrifying. Then you've got the more recently infected, who have maybe just turned infected, and the sound design is what comes through there, where what makes them terrifying is that they still sound so human. Where, like, sometimes I'll be playing the game and I'll be caught off guard because I'm not sure, is that a person or is that an infected, just because the nature of their voice still sounds so human, and, like, the way that they scream and the way that they sort of vocalize, it sounds so odd because it's so un-zombie-like, and it's really, really genuinely off-putting. But the crux of the game and the story, obviously, is the relationship between Ellie and Joel. And with one exception, I think there's one scene, or sort of one beat in their relationship that feels kind of forced. I think that relationship is perfect, and it carries the entire game. But, like, the thing I'm talking about is around the midpoint of the game, where you found Joel's brother, Tommy, who's kind of been off doing his own thing, and he's sort of like the ringleader of this whole other society, and Joel is kind of trying to pawn Ellie off onto him, because he's like, I'm getting too attached, I gotta go back to doing my own thing. You take the girl and like deliver her to where she needs to be. And Ellie catches wind of this and, you know, reacts the way that you'd expect, because you've already bonded plenty over the course of this game, and she kind of feels bad about the idea that you're trying to pawn her off. And she and Joel get into an argument. Joel is, like, insistent that this is the right thing to do and that he's sort of, like, ready to sever ties with her. That argument ends without a resolution, and then, like, a fight scene happens. Like bad guys storm into the house that you're currently in, and, like, you fight them off. And then after that gameplay sequence, Joel has suddenly changed his mind. Like, I'm really not sure what occurred between the fight and Joel being like, nah, I'm gonna stick with Ellie. Like, that is the one instance in this game where it really feels like they had to just sort of throw their hands up in the air and say, Joel just changed his mind, you know, light switch moment. And it really sticks out because the relationship growth over the course of the rest of the game is so natural feeling. And it all leads up to what is obviously, and this is the big spoiler that I'm pretty sure everyone knows at this point, but it all leads up to the ending of the game where you deliver Ellie to where she has to be, and that they're going to, it turns out that the procedure that's needed to derive the cure from her involves killing her. And so, this is again the great gameplay and story integration. The game forces you to play through Joel deciding, no, I'm not going to do that, and rescuing Ellie by killing everyone in the hospital. And, like, already I have been sort of feeling this really kind of perverse feeling, and, like, this kind of guilt of, like, having to kill as many humans that you do to survive through this game as opposed to infected. And that feeling kind of goes away as the circumstances change and the humans that you're dealing with become more and more malicious. But here, in the ending sequence, you're just murdering people left and right who are really just trying to save the planet. And it's really unfortunate, but the game makes you live through that. And this is where I think the really brilliant masterstroke lies, which is that that's not the final gameplay sequence. You take Ellie out and she's unconscious, and she wakes up and asks what happened, and Joel has to lie, and Joel makes up this complete fabrication for why they're out of there and what happened at the hospital. And the last gameplay sequence in the game is you playing as Ellie, And I think it's kind of a fascinating bookends to playing as Sarah at the start of the game. Because here in the ending, there's no action, it's just Joel and Ellie are on a walk. They're going back to, like, Tommy's place because they've decided to just sort of live there. And Joel is kind of blissfully making the comparison between Ellie and Sarah, and openly, now for the first time, really basically claiming Ellie as his surrogate daughter. And it's this moment that, were it not for the previous scene in the hospital, would play as kind of heartwarming, but given that context, it plays as almost creepy. And again, this is a great use of body language. Ellie clearly knows that Joel is BSing her. And in the final sequence of the game, she asks him, "Are you telling me the truth?" He's like, "I swear." And she says, "Okay," but you can just read into that okay. She knows he's lying. And I think choosing not to just have that be a cutscene, but to have that be the ending of a scene where you play through that hike up the mountain as Ellie rather than as Joel, and again, like, integrating you with the player character, and Ellie is the character who shares in what you're meant to be feeling in that sequence, is some brilliant storytelling through gameplay. And like, just the entire approach that this game has is something that I do not experience a lot with video games. Because the reason I get on this point so much is that in video games there's usually a very clear segregation between the gameplay and the story. And I think the fact that this game does so much to sort of like blur that line, and to have as much story told through the act of playing as possible, is like, it's just, this is one of those things where I'm like, this is what we can do with this medium. This is what video games can be. And the way that, like, this game is being adapted into a show now, and for as much as I'm sure that will be a good show when it comes out, I can't help but wonder, is it going to be missing something compared to this game, where the medium that it's in is just so much part of its identity and so much part of what makes it work. Like, the interactive element is constant throughout this game, and constant to the emotion that you're meant to be feeling. And I'm just really curious to see how a show is going to attempt to convey the same feelings that this game feels without the interactive element to lean on. But yeah, no, that's about, I think, my biggest takeaway, is that this is kind of the perfect video game in the sense that I will show this to someone as like, why make video games story-based and not just like movies? Because this is what you can do. This is the story that you can tell through an interactive medium. And so I don't know what higher compliment I can give this game beyond that. But yeah, so that's how I felt. So, if you've got any thoughts on this game that you feel like you want to add to sort of the discussion, what are you expecting or hoping for from Part 2? Then, just lay that out in the comments. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching.